Hello and welcome to another episode of Snapchat or Marvel Snap podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Logan.
And I'm the other one, Nate.
Nate, I gotta say, man, this is the one season where this is the closest I've ever been to Infinite. I am rank 96 as of the time of this recording, and I'm hoping that by the time that this episode releases on public feeds, I'll have hit Infinite, the grind will have been over, and I can go back to having fun with the game now instead of treating it like a serious competition sort of thing, like I'm in the NBA or something, because it's not fun, especially when you have locations like Asteroid M just messing up some of your decks and just like, oh, you want to play over here? Oh, too bad. You can't do that, man. Have you gotten to experience Asteroid M? It's honestly, I don't think it's as bad as some of the other ones that we've gotten before. I think it's kind of cool.
I've played a few games with Asteroid M sort of in play. I don't hate it. Like, it's definitely way more conditional than I think any other like special board lane, whatever you want to call it, like tile. Mm-hmm. I think it offers the most interesting sort of challenges, and you almost have to build decks specifically to deal with it. Obviously, like move decks are going to get a bit of a bump off of it.
Yep.
Like obvious strategies are going to be like, putting Kingpin sort of in there and then maybe hoping, and there's all sorts of stuff. So the only time I got frustrated with it, one time it pulled somebody's Cosmo into the lane and it it basically killed my Shuri before, like, and I was a little irritated with that. But other than that, I mean, I think it's interesting. I do, like I said, I like that I've seen some decks, a lot of them using like Dagger, Craven, like, stuff like that. And like I saw a really cool play where somebody dropped basically Vulture into a lane and pulled it over. And first turn, Vulture's what, a 3/8 at that point in time or whatever. Yep. I like that. I like it. I like it a lot.
Earlier, and I was like, oh, this is pretty nice. I'm gonna have to play move decks just for the next however many hours this location's live, because that was pretty cool. Yeah, I bring that up because, again, I'm a little hesitant to play the game because of the location, because I'm like, I don't need these locations sometimes tend to mess me up more than they should, and I'm a little worried this one was going to mess me up. Thankfully, it hasn't too bad with some of the decks I run. Plus, it's always good if you have like Scarlet Witch or just the Reality Stone. You can just change it. But man, I bring this up to ask this question because the next one we're supposed to get, I can't remember the name of it exactly. Someone will have to correct me, but I believe it's on turn 5. If that location's there, it plays your cards for you. Kind of like a ego for one turn sort of thing, man. And it kind of has me wondering a little bit, are these locations getting out of control?
I mean,
they get a little too crazy.
You kind of have to see it. Like, listen, like ego, the worst part is like, and yeah, I snap when ego pops up. I do it, but I'll tell you what, like if it's too bad, like if it's just like being like the dumbest thing, I'm not losing 8 cubes over ego. Like I will give somebody 4 on that one. But like if it's like not even like entertaining, like because sometimes it's just like it's ego's stupid. Ego is so dumb.
Ego's worse than Agatha. I'll say it.
100%. So if it's like that levels of bad, you're going to see like, I won't play a deck without Scarlet Witch or Storm or somebody in there to like kill that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's kind of, you gotta sort of like, and it's only one turn. So like how much damage can it actually do? But that goes back to like the whole, like, Mario cartification where it's like, there's like, they want you to sort of treat this game, and you just mentioned like you're getting like serious, you're sort of like digging into the competition of it, right? Like you're trying to like seriously climb, but it is hard to sort of maintain that and sort of like a reasonable state of mind, and at the same time know that the game could just like be like, oh, here's a blue shell, like go get bent. Like I'll tell you what, I lost a match the other day because was it a Sakar or whatever, where it just pulls a card at the end of the turn. It pulls it pulled She-Hulk out of my hand and played her on like turn 3. And I'm like, I don't want to play She-Hulk on turn 3 unless I actually want to play She-Hulk on turn 3. Next turn, dude Shang-Chi'd me. And there was like, it threw off the entire, like he Shang-Chi'd her. It threw off the entire tempo of the rest of the match for me. And it's like, like with stuff like that. And again, it's like, sometimes that's the game, but it's like stuff like that. It just feels like almost like I bounced right after that because it's like, dude.
So you mentioned that stuff and I was homesick today, and so of course I was watching a lot of YouTube. And I watched this dude do a stream. I can't remember his YouTube channel. He's pretty hilarious. Stream. He started a stream like late at night. I'm like, hey, I'm not going to bed until I hit infinite. I'm at rank 95. We're going for it. It took him 6 hours to hit infinite, and I was sitting there watching that, thinking back to when I got to 95 last night, and then proceeded to drop down to 93. With like, I think I had 6 cubes left or something. Maybe I was like at flat 93. And I was like, you know, if I end this season without hitting infinite, I'm okay with that. Just because of how crazy this game is. And I don't mean, and I'm not saying that to like, to rag on the game. I do still think the game is fun, but like there's this weird tension there between wanting to go for the competitive side of things and go for it versus the random blue show where you get those like 3 games in a row sort of thing. It's like, okay, how do you balance this? I don't know, because I can tell you right now, I'm never going for infinite again. This grind has been nuts because this game is so randomized in that way.
And that's really the thing. Like you and I were sort of having a conversation, you know, via text, and you asked me about like, does this kind of like stuff happen in other card games? And I'm like, to a certain extent, yeah. The meta gets a little stale. It needs shook up. You know, there are dominant deck forms in every sort of collectible card game I've ever played. But I think the one thing that really does separate it is those 3 lanes and basically the 3 random tiles that you play on. Like, can really make or break. Like, dude, sometimes it's worth it to just like hang on to the board because you're like, one of us is going to bounce. Like, and if I just like, it becomes a war of attrition because it's like, this is an absolutely miserable board. There's like little to no whatever. And I don't know, like, just all of that can be tough. So
yeah, man. We'll have to do an episode on like our favorite locations and our most hated locations. Obviously, was it Lechugala, the one that gives you 5 rocks or whatever, is probably the worst. Maybe no, I think that's the one where if you play there, it gives rocks, puts rocks in your deck. Whatever the other one is, Subterranea is the one that gives you rocks in your deck. It's great when I'm running Darkhawk because then it's like I might as well snap. Like it's an instant win for me. But any other time, stop it.
And I don't know about you, man, but like when I draw like 2 or 3 rocks in a row and it's just like, and then my opponent is playing cards, like I feel so like defeated, so crushed. I'm like, and it's not even like, it's not even my opponent didn't beat me. The game beat me. Like the game gave you that victory. Like, and so, yeah, it's just tough. Like I said, I feel you. And it's like, you know, I'm not going to pretend like I don't have an interest in climbing at all. I just like, I'm like, I refuse to get into that headspace because it's like,
I'll tell you as someone who's been in it almost all season long now, it's not worth it. Although I'm still surprised that someone in the community managed to get infinite with a Hella deck. That blows my mind, but congrats to you, Sojourner.
You know what though? It's like, dude, it's like, I think that's the thing is like, what happens is somebody sort of like does something interesting and surprising and it works because nobody's expecting it. And then what happens is like the other side of that is like, you know, people sort of like see that, they glom onto it, and then, well, you start expecting that. And then it's like, I don't know, but Sojourner, like, congrats, man, dude. That was so like when you were like, I think I just made the infinite with this deck. I was like, what?
Yep. That's what I know. That's how I got out of the 80s. I started using Nimrod with Shuri and Destroyer and just started like winning, like not like crazy, but pretty consistently, more so than what I was with my other decks. And it's because people were like, Nimrod sucks. Like people have already written off Nimrod, and then I show up in here with Destroyer Shuri into Nimrod, being a little creative with it, and people are like, "What the heck?" The dude just Shuri'd Nimrod, blew him up with Arnim Zola, and then blew him up again with what? It's like, yeah.
Got a whole bunch of Nimmies just hanging out.
Yep. 10 power Nimrods, man.
Yeah, I think that is the sort of beauty of it. Like sometimes, like even if you take something like my personally, I play like a modified Shuri deck for the most part. And in one of my 5 spots, I have Vision because
good card.
Like he's a solid card, and like all of a sudden, like if you don't have Skull, if you don't have some of the other pieces, like you can just have a 14 power floating around to like sort of just pin wherever you need that bump, and he can be kind of scary, when he's that big. So
definitely gives you a lot of anxiety. I would know because I played against a 14 power Vision before. I'm like, this is really tense. I hope I play Shang-Chi in the right lane, because if I didn't, this is going to go south real fast. But speaking of Shuri, speaking of the meta, let's just get into the topic, man. I know there's been a lot of other YouTubers and people commenting on the patch notes and stuff like that, but we haven't done that yet. And we're going to in this episode. Also look at some of the data mine stuff, give you another favorite card to highlight to round out the episode before we let you go. But Nate, let's talk about it, man. They patched the game, and a lot more nerfs than there are buffs. There were no buffs, really. There's some clarifications on some of the cards. But for the most part, we'll get into it. I'm going to go over some of the highlights that they have here on their patch notes on the website here. Of course, the token shop did get updated. There are no longer any Series 3 cards in the token shop. However, if you are not Series 3 complete, you will have a special spot where you can claim a free Series 3 card every month. So you do have that, which is kind of nice, but you're still going to have to go through the grind of getting Series 3 cards, which is I don't know. Some people really like it. Other people are like, this is insane. But they did say you're supposed to get more tokens. So
it also depends on the Series 3 card that you're getting. So I was Series 3 complete up until the patch when they put M'Baku, Atuma, and Orca into Series 3, right?
Man. Some of the best cards in Marvel Snap right now, dude. I'm telling you.
Atuma is it's kind of like Atuma is a solid player.
Atuma in an armor lane is great. Yeah, I'll say that.
And Atuma in a Knull deck, like he's an automatic 10 power. Throw him, But anyways, all of that being said, like, I was telling you, I was like, so. I pulled Atuma like a couple weeks ago, and I was like, oh, cool. Like, whatever. And then they dropped down Orca and M'Baku, and I got Orca in my pin shop. And then I was like, I had some collectors caches, and I was like, I was hoping for a steampunk variant, and I got M'Baku, the biggest disappointment in the game. Nice. And I was like, really? Oh, sweet. Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, M'Baku's great in a Cerebro 2 deck. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that he like I don't put him in like total trash territory, but he's not a great card. But we're not here to talk about that. You mentioned all of the sort of the patch notes that have recently come out, and the patch that is now live. And so let's get into that, man, for real. Yeah,
well, you mentioned those cards dropping from Series 4 to 3 was M'Baku, Orca, Atuma. Let's go over Series 5 to Series 4. You've got Zabu, which is still great. I used him in a Zabu Sarah deck, Darkhawk deck, to climb a lot this season. Trust me, Zabu is still a great card. If you don't have him, pick him up. Sauron dropped to Series 4 as well. He removes all ongoing abilities of cards in your hand and deck, which is really good if you're running a Typhoid Mary, Red Skull sort of thing. Basically a Shuri deck. Shauna, the She-Devil, who spawns 1-cost cards in every lane, which is pretty cool, depending on what you get. Dazzler, who jumps in power if you have all of your lanes filled. I actually unlocked her in a random cache today.
There you
So I was
go.
like, cool. I'm looking forward to playing around with Dazzler a little bit and trying to see what she's all about. And then Shadow King as well, who I played a couple matches against. And I got to be honest, I don't think Shadow King is that great, but I don't know. Maybe we haven't figured out his potential yet.
I think Shadow King's going to be one of those cards that he's an interesting debuff option, but for now, I don't think there's a lot of stuff that capitalizes on that.
Right. Right. It's kind of early to see. Like once more people get their hands on him and trying to see what he's all about, I think we'll see kind of how he shakes out. A few other things real quick. There are some new audio sounds for Thanos, Nimrod, Master Mold, Negasonic, Teenage Warhead. For those of us who will get Teenage Warhead in like 3 or 4 months when we finally have enough tokens for her, or she drops down to Series 3. New location sounds for Morag and Bar Sinister. And also Thanos, in a way, did get buffed in this game with new visual effects that show up at the beginning of the game. I'll have a video up on YouTube of it because it is pretty cool. You see Thanos show up the stones, they get thrown into your deck, and he's talking about balancing the universe or something like that. And then when you play all the stones, it shows the Thanos card in the middle of the screen. Both players see it. All the stones power him up to like, what is it, 20 or something? I don't know what it is.
It's a plus 10 buff. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it's just like, oh crap. And most people tend to retreat when they see that. So it's pretty, or they get their Shang-Chi's ready, whichever one, but it's pretty cool. I'll show it on YouTube, at least the opening effects, but that gets into the cards that did get nerfed to a degree, and that we'll just talk about Thanos here first and foremost. You know, Nate, the first episode of this podcast, we went over patch notes for February's season or something like that.
Yeah.
And we were talking and remarking about Thanos going from a 6'8" or 6'9" to a 6'11". And it's like, oh my gosh, this dude is a monster now. They went back on that and made him a 6'10".
Yeah.
So I don't know if that really changes anything because, again, when you play Thanos in a deck, you rarely ever play Thanos himself. You're mostly playing the stones at that point, which goes into the Space Stone, which we all kind of had a feeling this was going to be the card that got nerfed. Instead of it being whenever you play Space Stone before the patch, you could take a card from that lane and move it somewhere else. You could take Sanctum Sanctorum or take an unreachable lane, or maybe a storm flooded lane or something and kind of curve the battle.
Yep.
Now it's next turn you can move one card to this location. So it's kind of like Cloak now, which I'll be honest, I'm okay with it. I've used it a couple times and it makes sense to me.
Yeah, I think so Glenn Jones, and you and I were talking about this. He's one of the product heads, like he's one of the leads when it comes to development in Snap. And he had a whole thread on that. And one of the comments I saw him make was that basically, because people were asking about that, is that a lot of times that Space Stone will get used to actually create, like to clear out space for more Lockjaw drops. And so part of that is sort of negating that and saying like, you play your 3 cards in the Lockjaw lane and that's what you get.
And to a degree though, you can still do that. You're just going to have one less space to do it depending on where you put it. Cause I did that earlier where I was like, okay, Space Stone over here, Lockjaw, get 2 more drops out of him. Okay, cool. Didn't pull Leech. So the other player's probably rejoicing. But yeah, it's fine. I think those are honestly okay changes to Thanos. I think the addition with the visual effects just makes it even cool. I think Thanos is still a really good card. You're not this guy. You're going to see this guy around for
the Thanos deck is still like, even with all of the and we'll get into that too, like the nerf to Quinjet and everything else. Like it's still going to be an S tier deck. Period. Yeah. Like
what kind of took a hit though is Quinjet unfortunately got hit with it to where now it only reduces cost to a minimum of 1. So it no longer reduces things like the Infinity Stones to 0, but it also doesn't reduce 1 cost cards down to 0 either. Like you would normally see in like Maria Hill, if she drops a card or whatever, that's a 1 cost. It's still going to be a 1 cost. If you're running things like the Hood or any other kind of 1 cost things and you spawn more of them, it's still just going to be 1 cost. So Nate, I want to get your opinion on Quinjet kind of getting hit here, because I understand the reasoning for it, but I can't help but think that some of those other decks just got hit kind of hard, to where you're going to have to rely pretty heavily on cards like Falcon and, well, basically Beast. I think if anything, this gives Beast some more leeway or more attention because of that.
I mean, like, let's kind of be honest. Prior to the Infinity Stone Quinjet Lockjaw build, Quinjet was like, it's a good card, but it wasn't like crazy. Like you would see it in Dino, you would see it in decks with like Devil Dino, Beast, Falcon, stuff like that. Collector decks.
I actually have Quinjet in one of my decks still, because it just, you drop Agent Coulson and it's like, boom, like you power that up with Zabu. It's like, dude, the 4 cost is now a 2. It's like perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and it's still a fairly useful card, I think. And there were some people who were basically saying, well, why don't you just, when you have a Thanos deck, why don't you just include the stones in, like, they count as part of the deck? Because that was the problem, is that the stones actually get added to the deck after Thanos. Like once you start playing this, the stones don't actually, they're not part of your deck. They get added to the deck. And so that probably would have been just the better overall fix. But I think there's a little bit more to that than they wanted to. And, it does suck for, because, having a 0 cost card is always a good time, but it just, like I said, it's one of those situations where it was frankly, that was one of the ones I was the most convinced that was going to happen. I think you and I had talked a little bit about it, and there were a lot of like people were talking about like nerfing Lockjaw. There were all sorts of like nerfing Leech, and I was like, nah, I think it's going to be Quinjet. I think Quinjet's going to do something so that the stones don't get played for 0, because that's what made that deck so lethal. I mean, you could dump, and you still, like, for 1 energy, you can still play a lot of crap out of your hands really quickly. So do some other decks that do rely on it take a little bit of a beating? Yeah. You're not going to be able to pull off some of the sneakier turn 6 sort of like, card dumps. But at the same time, like, I think overall it was probably the most needed nerf balance issue, in my opinion. So
it's funny you mentioned Lockjaw, because I thought for sure Lockjaw was going to get some kind of nerf, to where instead of any card you play at that location, he rotates it out with another card in your deck. I thought they were going to change him to the next card you play here gets rotated out with a card in your deck, and then you could just play the rest of that lane like normal, which I was kind of rooting for to a degree, because there's been times I put Lockjaw in a location and I'm like, man, I need to play this card here, but I know if I do, he's going to rotate it out with something else, and it's going to be just way worse than what I need it to be, because I'm seeing what's left in my deck and I'm like, this is not going to end well. I can assure you. But Lockjaw is safe.
I had seen people propose that Lockjaw's ability get classified as an ongoing, so that way you could technically Enchantress or Rogue it. And honestly, I think just leaving Lockjaw alone is the right call. Just period. Like, it's 9 times out of 10, Lockjaw really isn't going to swing the game wildly in your favor. It's very heavily RNG dependent. I just think he's a card that like is best left alone, and changing his ability. And I think too, like that's sort of the threat though, is because like you said, it's like, I need this card to show up here, but I have Lockjaw in the lane. Well, maybe you should have thought about that. It's kind of like, you can't always have your cake and eat it too. So
that's true. That's true. But let's move on to Shuri Red Skull decks. Red Skull was originally a 5 cost 15 power card with an ongoing ability of enemy cards at this location have +2 power. He is now still a 5 cost card, but now he's 13 power with an ongoing ability of enemy cards at this location have +1 power. Man, let me read The next one was She-Hulk 2, and we'll talk about those before we get to Aero.
Mhm.
Rest in peace, Aero. She-Hulk was originally a 6 cost, 10 power card. She's now a 6 cost, 9 power. She was reduced in 1 power card, mainly because of just how, I mean, she was pretty much almost in every single deck. I mean, I think if I were to pull up my game now, she would be in just about every single deck I have.
Let's zero in on Red Skull for a second, right? Effectively, he's actually on a single play. Like if you're just playing Skull without like the Shuri bump or the Shuri doubling, he's effectively a little more powerful now. He's basically a 5/9 effectively, where before he would have been at a 5/15 -8. He would have been a 5/7. Overall, if you do sort of double him with Shuri, he still has the same effective, basically as an effective 5/22. A lot of people are like, this isn't really a nerf. This is actually more of a small buff. And I think that the thing is, this makes Skull a little more playable as just a card himself. It doesn't really affect, because like a lot of times, like, you know, as somebody who we both play Shuri decks a good bit, like you're not usually playing Skull by himself. Like the only reason you're pulling him out is so that you can Shuri him and then copy his power with Taskmaster. Right. That's what you're doing with them. Occasionally, like I get a little like crazy, and I'm like, oh no, here's a Red Skull in that empty lane, the one that you left alone. But he didn't really get much. Like it doesn't feel like a buff, but it is actually a sort of buff. He's effectively a little stronger just by himself, and he's pretty much the same card. The people are like, well, it's a 530 versus a 526, and it's like, well, effectively he's the same.
I've played a couple matches already against Shuri decks, and it literally feels the exact same. I mean, you're gonna have to counter it the same way you do with different cards, but unfortunately one of those cards that you would normally use got buffed now or got nerfed. Now I'm not of the crowd that thinks that Aero got nerfed down to leader levels. She is not that bad. Leader is still a good card. Let me break down kind of the changes here. She was originally a 5/7, and on reveal, she would move all enemy cards played this turn to this location. So you could just really ruin someone's turn 6 combo. Now she's a 5/8, so she got a bump in power. And now her new ability is move the last enemy card played this turn to this location. So now you can play around Aero more effectively, but she can still jack up some of your decks. And they even name it right here in the patch notes, cards like Galactus. So she can still jack Galactus's play up. She can still miss Argola.
Aero's big utility is against Galactus decks. That's primarily where like she's really the strongest counter to a Galactus deck. So I think they wanted to keep that intact. She's a 5/8 now, so she's got a little more board presence. And I don't know. I don't think this, like, I know some people are like sort of like, oh, now she sucks. And it's like, well, does she suck, or was she just sort of broken to begin with? And I mean, like, how many times I used to use her this way. Is like, if I was losing a lane, I just turn 6, I drop, and I had a fairly good presence in the other two. I drop Aero into that losing lane to suck whatever you were playing in there to basically win. And it's like, so she was on sort of like leader, pre-nerf leader levels in a lot of ways. They not quite, but really close. And so it's one of those situations where I'm kind of like, well, the jury's out on her. I don't think she's ruined. I think she is definitely tweaked, and there are workarounds now. But I still think she's going to be like, I was watching a video and Cozy was sort of talking about the nerf, and he was like, no, she's still a really great card. Like, is she as sort of like punchy as she used to be? No, but she's still top shelf. It just means that you have to be a little savvier when you play her. That's all. Yeah.
And I would totally agree with that. I think for decks like Death Wave, I think she's still going to be really effective in that.
Mhm.
You know, you wave on, what is it? It's like turn 4 or 5 or something, so you can play She-Hulk and Arrow and then Death or something as the last turn, to just kind of pull cards away from the lanes that you're trying to win. And I think this kind of brings balance to the card. I'll admit I loved using Arrow, but I hated losing to Arrow, which happened very frequently.
Yeah.
And I think this just kind of balances her out a little bit. I don't think she's a terrible card. I think, like what you said, Nate, you're just going to have to get better using the card and kind of choosing when to play her by reading the board and kind of seeing, okay, are they going to skip this turn? You know, what are they going to do? And then kind of go from there. So I don't think it's that bad. I don't think it's that bad, but as always, listeners, let us know. A few other things here that we'll go over. Cards like Mystique, Absorbing Man, Taskmaster, in order for them to copy the ability of the card that you're wanting it to copy, it has to be in play on the board. They no longer pull from the graveyard, which is really awesome. That's super helpful with things like Taskmaster. Because normally, you know, if you blew up Red Skull, he would just copy that power that Red Skull had in the Shuri deck and then still win a lane. And it's like, okay, how? So I think those make sense. I'm totally fine with those changes. Morbius, I initially thought got nerfed, but I just misread it. His power no longer updates in hand or in deck, only at a location. So basically what that means is once you play Morbius, all the cards that you've discarded, it'll update his power total on the board. It just won't do it in the hand or in deck. And so it'll change it there. Knull got a similar update to where it will still update the power in hand, but it no longer updates in deck, which is fine anyway. The reason they did this was so it didn't screw you over if you were playing Mr. Negative and then making Knull just completely unplayable because it's like a 28 power or something, whatever it may be. So that's, again, it's fine. Widow's Bite text got cleaned up a little bit. There was a few bug fixes here as well. I'll let y'all read those. There was one on here I did want to point out. They did fix an instance of Adelan where the visual effects getting stuck on screen when it activates. That happened to me every single time Adelan showed up. So I'm glad they fixed that. Means I won't have to close out of the game. One thing I do want to point out here it is. Cards that lose their ability due to Leech no longer get that ability back if they're pulled back in play by another card like Beast, Lockjaw, or any of those other cards, which I was like, dang it, that was how I got around Leech.
And I think that kind of, honestly, that one irritates me a little bit because it's like, well, we have a Leech workaround, and they're like, no, you don't. But Leech doesn't get nerfed or anything. Like Leech gets left alone, and you know the whole thing there is like, well, the response, Glenn, and again, it was that Glenn Jones guy or whatever, and he was like, well, there's only really one strong deck that uses Leech, and I'm like, dude, you haven't lost to Leech enough. Like, you need to, like, granted, yes, there's only one really strong deck that's using him, but he's still just a devastating card.
Yeah. And really any deck that uses Lockjaw. I've been seeing a lot of like classic Thor Lockjaw decks recently, which I don't know why that is, but it's fine with me. I mean, I'm like, man, this takes me back to the early days when I was playing Marvel Snap. I miss seeing this deck. You can assume Lockjaw's in that, and I've gotten hit with it several times. I'm like, well, what the heck? And so this kind of goes back to the whole entirety of these patch notes. Some of these things I like. I like how I said some of these things I like, and I can't pick one out that I like. I think overall, this patch notes, it has me a little worried about the state of the game and the future of it. But Nate, I want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, and we didn't talk about like the nerfed She-Hulk at all, but like it's fairly inconsequential. Like, I mean, dude, like most of the time when you're playing her for, you know, like I would play her turn 4 sometimes, you know, for 3 energy. You know, get some early board presence or whatever. Like I'd throw her in a Cosmo lane or something like that. But like even at as a 9 power, she's still like a hefty presence on the board. There's like that 1 power more often than not isn't going to like it doesn't move the needle.
There's this one combo I found here lately that I've been using, and I got this from one of Cozy's decks, obviously. And what you do is in this deck, of course, there's Devil Dinosaur, and so you can Moon Girl your deck, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you have She-Hulk in there, you Moon Girl your deck, skip turn 5 with Quinjet on the board. So you have a 0-cost She-Hulk, a 1-cost She-Hulk, and then a big old Devil Dino that you can put on the board, and it's just, it's kind of a crazy turn 6 because you're putting a lot of power on the board. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, she's still a beast. She's still worth being in every deck.
But yeah, overall, I'm fairly positive on this. I feel like a lot of and I know there's a little outrage about Shuri, right? Like people are like, why didn't Shuri get nerfed? And I'm like, and I think his response to Shuri was like, well, we don't have like an easy, she doesn't have, her ability is like integral to her identity as a card. Yeah. And so there's not really an easy knob. And I'm like, well, you're right. But also just make her 0 power, make her -1 power. Like make it so that like it kind of hurts to put her on the board a little bit. You know, and I feel the same way about Wong. You know, it's like these cards that have these like they're sort of high risk, high reward moves. And so like, make them a little riskier to play. I mean, I feel that way about Leech. It's like all of these, you should almost never feel like, and I think something he said, he talked a little bit about armor. He's like, you know, he wants to be a little bit of like, armor's a little overplayed right now. She's like in every deck, or every other deck, you know, and it's really there to protect your big cards against Shang-Chi. And he's like, I'd rather have like sort of like the fear of Shang-Chi present in almost all of my games. And I think, and again, it's like, it's sort of like, you need, I think what's really kind of fun about this game is that, and what's kind of been disappointing in the same breath is that the fun part is that it has sort of like that Sunday Night Football, like any game, any given game, like you can kind of like on any game, any team can win, you know, sort of like, but we're sort of entering into an era where it's like, you know, the meta is sort of getting a little more static. It's sort of not getting stale, but it's like stabilizing a little bit. And like there are decks that are very obviously going to win like against, you know, and Cozy, I was watching some stats, and I mean, you've got decks that win 6 out of every 10 games that are based at essentially a 60% win rate. And that's that. I don't know. Like if you want to sort of like talk about like creating threat, then you need to sort of like open it up so that like maybe there is a little bit more risk to playing some of these other cards that give you these wildly outsized results. You know, like I think, and you know, anyways, overall, I'm pretty pleased with the way that the patch went. I think it did move the needle a little bit. It didn't shake it up horribly. It did sort of like they're trying to slow a few things down and make things a little bit more competitive. But I think the reality is though that not every deck is going to like. There's some decks that just aren't going to compete. Like if you're playing mostly pull 3 cards, there are pull 3 decks that are competitive, right? But like most people who aren't out of pull 3, they're not going to be able to really like hang with somebody who's got all of pull 3, most of series 4, and is deep into like has, you know, is pretty deep into series 5 as well. Yeah. Like you don't have a lot of answers for a lot of the more, the bigger power plays. And so I think all you can do is sort of at the upper end, maybe tweak it so that it's not as crazy. And again, like, you know, so it's just kind of one of those things where I think balancing is always difficult. And like, overall, I mean, like I said, my biggest gripe is that Leech didn't get touched at all. Like that little slime ball is just allowed to just be a total nuisance, unhindered. But
Yeah, that was the one thing that was really missing for me from this patch notes was some kind of adjustment to Leech, where it's just like if it gets pulled out of Lockjaw turn 3, turn 4, you only lose those abilities for one turn. And I'm like, I would be okay with that because at least by then, okay, I know my next turn, I'm going to be able to try and salvage this game. But and you could even still pull Leech out on turn 5, you know, as his power or his cost is, but it's still just, man, it's kind of game ruiners in some regards, unless you're playing like a Patriot deck, or maybe you're running a similar deck to the person you're facing. Then it's like, you just help me out because now my Red Skull is not going to buff you up, you know?
Yeah.
Those sorts of things. But I don't know. It'll be interesting to see kind of where things go. I'm definitely seeing a lot less Aero and a lot less Killmonger now because of these things, because I'm seeing Thanos just played less, which I think is good just because I'm sorry, some of the people I went up against that were playing Thanos Lockjaw decks were a little brain dead in how they did it. Turn 3, dump all the stones in there. It's like all of your big power cards are just sitting there right now. And it's turn 4. Here's my Shang-Chi, which just powered up my Knull. And it's like, what are you doing? You know?
Yeah.
So I think there's really smart ways to play Thanos. And I think we're going to see some more of that as we move forward. But
And that's what I was getting. Go ahead.
I was gonna say this thing with the Red Skull Shuri deck, man. I don't know how I feel about it. There's a part of me that's like, I'm okay with it. Because I can still outplay them if I'm just paying attention and I pull the right cards, right? But there's still parts where I'm like, I just don't feel like it did enough. But I don't really know what you do to Shuri to help curb that. At the same time, I think it's just because people just aren't being inventive with Shuri. You know, that's like I climbed out of the 80s with Shuri into Nimrod into Destroyer, and that worked. I don't know why that worked. I guess people were expecting Nimrod, you know, and so I still think she's a good card, but it's just I don't know how you go about balancing that card itself. I think this patch as a whole did a good job, like you said, of moving the needle to a certain direction. But I think with some cards, it just didn't do enough. And of course, I'm thinking of Leech specifically.
Yeah, I think like, and that's the thing is like some of this stuff is just going to take some time to shake out. I mean, I'm of the mindset that I don't think Shuri is the problem. I think the problem is that, and I think they actually like sort of like tweaking Taskmaster's ability so that he can only copy a card that's on board is like that's part
huge.
Of that's huge because it's like you know that's going to slow down some of that. And I think like overall, like I said, we were talking about this patch, this sort of update really does feel like it's going to force people to play smarter. Right. Like I've been, we've got the baby at the house and I've been staying home with him and I'm not sleeping a lot. So like, I'm not thinking really very clearly. And so I was playing games and a lot of times like Shuri can be pretty like autopilot-y. It's like, it's like, I see my plays and I can sort of just kind of like, I don't have to think too much about it. But what I have noticed is that I have to be a little savvier. I have to actually pay attention to what's going on the board. I can't just sort of rely on Aero to like pull my can out of the fire every time.
Yeah.
And it's like, those are meaningful buffs. Like I don't think just like you're not going to see potentially you could pull Skull down to like a 5/12, right? And I don't think Skull is the problem. I think it's like I said, and I don't think Shuri's the problem. I think it's that, just people.
It's just us. We're the players. The problem.
Well, I just think that it's kind of like it's one of those things where. I mean, like I'll tell you, like I'm going to give you guys a workaround that I use all the time. Like if I don't have Skull on the board, a lot of times, like if you're playing me. And if I don't have Skull on the board, turn 5 and I'm skipping the turn, I'm usually like I like to play vision too, so I like to spread my threat around a little bit. But what I like to do is I like to do turn 1 or turn 6. If I have Taskmaster in hand, I drop a double powered She-Hulk into one lane, and I drop an 18 power, Taskmaster into another lane. And it's kind of like, it's one of those things, like there are plenty of options here. And I think like, it's just, people have gotten too used to, I don't know. The deck is going, here's the thing. The Thanos deck, the Infinity Stone Lockjaw deck is going to be really potent because it's a potent deck, period. Like, and it has a lot of opportunities to get explosive very quickly. Same thing with the Shuri Zero decks. It's just a strong deck. And there are ways to work around it. And part of it, I think too, is just like, hey, if you're getting beat, just back out, like get out of the game. It's like, but
I mean, that's the thing that people don't, myself included, don't do enough. It's like, okay, I'm clearly losing. Maybe I'll see this out. Maybe no, just leave. Just leave. You know you're gonna lose. Just get out.
Just like, dude, like if the game goes sideways, like even if you already snapped, like get out. Like, losing 4 cubes is better than losing 8 cubes. And I think, like I said, it's just some of these decks, like I think pre-nerf were a little bit like just like it's like you could be stupid in a Thanos deck and still win games. Because there was just an abundance of power sort of at your fingertips. Whereas now you have to be a little savvier. You have to be a little smarter. It's still probably going to win more often than not, but
Yeah. And we'll see how things shake out as well. It's like I said, I mean, I've been playing since the patch, and even before the patch, I wasn't really seeing a whole lot of Red Shuri, Thanos Lockjaw decks at all. What I was seeing the most of? Control decks, typically with Daredevil and Professor X or Destroyer, or I saw a lot of Sarah control decks floating around. And man, those, I mean, if y'all want workarounds to these decks,
Sarah,
I'm serious.
Yep.
I didn't believe in Sarah decks for the longest time until I started, I sat down. I was like, okay, I'm going to spend some time with this deck and play it out and see how I do. And that got me into the 80s. And I'm like, man, this is actually a really good deck. And then when I realized it wasn't working that much, I needed something a little more surprising. It's when Nimrod got me into the 90s, which still blows my mind. But it's the thing of something I'm coming to learn with this game as I'm climbing ranks and trying to get to Infinite, is you need to be good with different decks. You need to try different decks. And I know that's easier said than done for someone like me who is out of pool 3, has a good chunk of pool 4 done, and has the quote unquote big bads. Although I think Kang is one of the big sads. He's just, I think Kang's a terrible card.
Dude, I beat somebody played Kang and then Galactus on me, and I whooped them. They played Kang, and I was like, oh, I got you. I know what you're doing. Like, it's like, and I didn't know, but I was like, I have a pretty good idea what you're doing next. And it's like, I did one play, and it's like, I had different tools in my hand. And it's like, when I pulled his Galactus into the other hand, he was like, oh no,
dude, my boy Galactus, I was so happy to get him. But man, the more and more I play against him, the more and more I'm like, this is an easily countered deck. Like, there's just no surprise to it at all, man. And it's just like, I took one down today because I'm like, I recognize all these steps because I played a Galactus deck for the longest time. I know what you're doing. You're putting Nimrod over here in the left lane. You're going to blow that up so they go over to the right lane and blow it up and fill your lane with Nimrods. I know what you're doing. Here's a Hobgoblin on your side because I have priority. And when this gets revealed, you're going to retreat. And sure enough, that's what happened. And they left. And I did the same thing with a Magneto play. Someone tried to do a turn 6 Galactus. It's like, guys, stop. I mean, you do what you want. Galactus is a fun card. I do not blame anyone for playing because that animation is dope.
Play the cards you want to play, but like, like a lot of times I think, you look at like these big cards and like, now I'm going to win. now I'm going to win. And it's like, well, no, it takes a little bit more than that. But, and I don't know if I'm sort of getting ahead of it, but we normally, we do sort of like to talk about like a pool 1 through, or a series 1 through 3 card that we recommend towards the end of the show. And we were sort of talking about her. I really want to tell people, like, if you guys are sleeping on Sarah and Sarah decks, like, stop. Like, she is like, I was just looking at some stats for her right now. When she is played, she wins 55% of her games. That's a monstrous sort of win streak. And I know, like, people are like, well, it's only a little bit more than 50%. And most cards don't hit 50%. So she's, I mean, and there's some absolutely explosive builds with her. And especially when you're pairing her with Zabu.
Yeah, that's the thing that blew my mind is, and we can just roll right into the favorite card highlight. I know I have this other section here, but we'll say that for the next episode because that'll fit in with it more nicely. Yeah, dude, Sarah decks is just, they're nuts because when you have Zabu on the board, which reduces your 4-cost cards down 1, so they're 3 costs, and then you have Sarah on turn 5 that reduces them even more along with your other cards, you can fill just about the entire board, depending on what you have in your hand, on turn 6, and your opponent has no idea what's coming. So you could easily hit them with, I mean, like I said earlier, I was running a Sarah Darkhawk deck. So I drop Darkhawk on turn 6. I drop Rock Slide into Absorbing Man, which is double the rocks in there, making Darkhawk even beefier. And then just because of how big Rock Slide is on top of Absorbing Man on top of Sarah, makes everything bigger. And then if I had a Nova on the board, end it with Killmonger, gives everything +1, and it's just insane. It's a stressful way to play, I'll admit, but once you kind of get in the groove of it and figure it out, it's like, okay, I'm kind of comfortable with this. I can roll with this. And that's how I got into the 80s, was with the Sarah Darkhawk deck.
There's, and I've mentioned it before, there's a Toxic Sarah build out there that turn 6, if you have Zabu and Sarah on the board, you can play Wong, Mystique, what's her face, Hazmat, and Luke Cage all in one turn. Just like, boop. And you are hitting all of your opponent's cards at that point in time for, what is that? Math here, Nate. You're doubling it and then you're doubling it again. Negative 4 or something? Negative 4. On every card. So it's a negative 16 power that you're applying to potentially to every, board, every card on the board. Or tile laying in the board. You know what I'm saying? I'm getting it. And it's 1 turn. Like that is a massive play. I mean, she's the ultimate utility card.
It's a fun time. I know getting these cards is going to get harder, especially now that Series 3 cards aren't in the token shop anymore. But if you do get a hold of them, I mean, try them out. They are a lot of fun. I was trying to think of what my favorite card highlight was going to be for this episode, and I was thinking Absorbing Man, but I'm pretty sure we've recommended Absorbing Man once before. And so I'm going to be a little cheeky with this one, but also kind of serious because it's a fun time. Orca's a Series 3 card right now. So I'm just saying, if you want to just have some fun and relax in the game, drop a turn 6. You want to really surprise people? Shuri into Orca. Turn 6. Watch what happens. It's going to be, or you could do a turn 5, right? You ramp into it with Electro, Shuri, then Orca, then Taskmaster.
That's silly.
I'm just saying, Nate beat out an Infinite.
Yeah, I did. I was kind of like, this isn't gonna work. No way.
I'm just saying, man. I know Orca's not gonna win a whole lot of matches. He's one of the least played cards in Marvel Snap, but I think that's because he was in the wrong pool. He's in pool 3 now. Give him a go. See what y'all think, or you can just be like, dude, Logan, no more.
I think he's just like, he's not a great card overall. Like, He's a little curveball here and there, but he's kind of like, eh.
You know what they need to do? Just make him a 6'10", and then when he's in a lane by himself, he bumps up 20 or 10. So he's like a 6'20" in one lane. Why not? Don't just skip Shuri. You can just put him right there.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. Like, maybe.
Hey, he would beat out Aero. So if Aero pulls him because they're thinking you're playing Galactus, just go for it.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what I ought to do to get to Infinite, is just play Orca.
No one would see it coming, dude. Absolutely no one would see it coming.
It's true.
So
it's true. But with that being said, listeners, thank you for listening to this beefy episode of Snap Chatter. As always, you can follow us over on Twitter. Follow us on YouTube. Hit the subscribe button, like button, all that jazz. Leave nice little comments for us. Like and subscribe to it on your podcast app of choice. Subscribe to it to your podcast app of choice, and leave nice reviews on the apps as well. But that's been your weekly episode of Snap Chatter for this weekend. Until next time, y'all keep on snapping, and we'll see you in the next episode.